Think Tech Hawaii. Civil engagement lives here.
We Like the 1% focuses on individuals and entrepreneurs, and even though it's International Women's Day today, way less than 1% of women are ever on any sort of rich list. Joining me to discuss why this might be the case is a white male, Jay Fidell, and an Asian female, Carol Mon Lee. Good morning, Jay. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, Pauline.
Otherwise known as the founder and president of Think Tech Hawaii and the executive vice president of Think Tech Hawaii. And Carol is a recent addition to this show because all my guests thus far, this is my last show for We Like the 1%, and my last show for Outside In was yesterday. So all of my guests it happened to be the case that they were male. So I thought on International Women's Day I should have a female guest. At least one. So today we're going to discuss a little bit about the Me Too movement, a little bit, because this is the show about individuals and entrepreneurs, a little bit about women in entrepreneurship, and why it might be the case that when you look on, say, the Forbes list or any sort of rich list, most of the females listed on there will have inherited their wealth, or it's because their father set up the business or their husband set up the business. It's very rare that you get a woman who is a self-made billionaire. So we know a lot of women go into law, they go into medicine, they're in the profession.
It's happening more and more,
yes,
Pauline.
I know, but
you look around
still
and you
small
find
numbers.
The chains are off. The chains are off, and women can do CEO things on national companies, international companies. Every time you look, there's a woman being promoted to CEO of a national company. But we're making uku bucks, by the way.
But we're headed for the top, okay? Well, this is the very top. This is serious things, oil and gas, large-scale manufacturing, mining, the serious things.
It's happening.
It's very slowly. It's getting there, but it's still a numbers game. So what I wanted to preface the show, I just wanted to bring up some ideas, not to cause offense to anybody, but just to have a discussion.
I got
about,
two questions.
Yes.
For you,
Yeah.
One is, what is this 1%? Well, you called the show, We Like It the 1%. What
you didn't
does that
watch
mean?
the promo? You didn't watch the promo for my show,
Nobody
Jay?
watched the promo. Nobody knew about you at the time.
Fine.
So it's time to refresh everybody.
Pro-individualist and pro-capitalist. So we focus on business people. And I'm interested in the 1%. Now, the billionaire class is different.
1% of what? It's not like some solution that Sherlock Holmes does,
Capitalism,
capitalism.
People who are
the richest.
Well, the richest is 7 zeros and a 1. That's the 0001. That's the billionaire class.
Yeah,
that's different. So the 1% are people who set up their own companies, are successful. What causes them to be successful?
Are you talking money or power? What are you talking about?
Well, you should watch my shows. I don't know why you're asking me all these questions.
Stop everything. Or I think I got my answer. It's a little vague, my answer, but we'll go with that. Next question.
Yes, to move.
Second question. Okay, you called this Me Too.
Boo-hoo. Yes.
So
and as a white male,
I need a definition in your perception of what Me Too is. And then I like a discussion of what you mean, what are the parameters here in this show. If you're talking about boo-hoo, boo-hoo sounds like it's, it's like we're sorry about Me Too. Is that what it is?
Well, first of all, I don't really understand the Me Too movement. I don't know what it actually accomplishes. Now, I am a person with forward momentum. I like end results. I don't like wastes of time. So,
are you one of those women CEO people we've been hearing about?
No. Well, to answer your question,
she's one of those women CEO people. She's going incognito, but we know her secret.
Jay, we don't have a lot of time on the show, so the boo-hoo, to answer your question, the boo-hoo element is, I think it kind of fosters this scenario of victimhood. This social justice warrior playing the victim thing.
You mean the women are victims?
Yeah.
And
yes,
boo-hoo
but
is
making a drama out of it.
Victim.
See, I don't like drama, so I don't like people making a drama out of things. I wish they would just, whatever happened to you, because people came from all sorts of horrible circumstances in the past. Most people came to America and they made a life for themselves. They worked very hard, and within a generation or two, they became middle class and upper middle class, and their children became more prosperous than they were. So making a victim of yourself or blaming your failures or lack of being successful on some other entity that is imaginary, or even if it did actually happen to you, you just move forward, right? I don't understand what this is accomplishing, because people have been aware of sexual harassment for a long time, but making a drama out of it, I don't know how it helps
There's
that.
something really cynical in saying boo-hoo about it.
What do you think, Carol?
Well,
let her speak. Let the Asian female
Well,
speak.
absolutely. There's been sexual harassment, sexual abuse. There's been gender discrimination. There's been racial discrimination, biases, forever.
Yes.
So what different movements do are create an awareness and hopefully promote education and a change in behavior. So we started with, let's say, the civil rights movement in the 60s and 50s, right? So now here we are 50 plus years later. Civil rights movement. Yes, indeed, we as a community, as a country, are more aware of a lot of these issues. But do we actually see a major improvement in changes? And there'd be a lot of people in our country would say, no, things are not that much better than they were 50 years ago. So change is very slow. And sometimes you go forward and you go backward and slow. And it's the same thing, I think, with gender issues, with sexual harassment, with sexual abuse, with, you know, the word equality is kind of a misnomer, because really it's more about fairness, right? Equal opportunity, but fairness. So again, the Me Too movement is just another opening of the door, creation of the awareness. It's not in and of itself just because it was started by the awareness of the sexual abuse by one person, in this case Harvey Weinstein, and his huge powers. It's not just limited to women in entertainment and big, powerful men. It happens every single day.
Of course. Now, my thinking behind it is, and thank you for giving your perspective on that, my thinking is, before we get to Harvey Weinstein and the potted plant and all that sort of thing, I wanted to highlight a few characteristics that are noticeable, and there are some YouTube channels that actually people can go to, such as MGTOW. This is men going their own way, which I find very entertaining. You know, it does bring into light some characteristics of the differences between men and women and how they operate in business. And one of the things that I agree with, actually, is if you have a scenario where, let's say, a female was being harassed or is being harassed, then I think if you're really successful or talented or really want to do what you want, you will become successful somehow. It's how badly the person wants it. And I always was curious as to know why women don't form organizations with each other. They don't seem to be able to coagulate as easily as men can. And the example...
Maybe within the context of a business organization.
Yes. I don't know any others. I'm not in the medical field.
A lot of women's organizations around the country.
Yeah,
and
sure.
in Hawaii.
They're organizations, but in my experience, I'm just talking from my experience. I can't speak for Carol's experience or other females' experience. And other females might have the same experience as I have encountered. I work mostly with men because a lot of things I'm engaged with are scientific, and that's not to say women aren't in science, but it's a numbers game. There are far more men in scientific areas than women, and that's just a fact, okay? I'm not saying there isn't a capacity, it's just as things are at the moment, that is a fact. Now, what I notice, and this is an expression that is sometimes used, and this is the tagline I used for the show, is that women can't form phalanx. And a lot of people don't know what that means. So phalanx is a military formation, and this was devised by the ancient Greeks. And what it was in the ancient Greek formation was a rectangle, and every Greek soldier had a spear and a shield. And what happens in a phalanx is that they lock shields and point the spears against a common enemy. And the metaphor in the corporate environment for that, when you say women can't form phalanx, it means a man can be jealous. Men can be jealous and competitive with other males. But when there's a crucial issue that affects the business, they'll forget about that. They'll wipe it out of their minds and unite together to meet a certain objective. I don't think, and I'm only speaking from my experience, that women can do that as easily. They don't seem to get along as easily because they have various passive-aggressive behaviors that I've observed. I'm a direct person, so I like people to be upfront with me if there's something wrong. Men seem to be more easily able to do that in my experience, whereas women, they sort of go behind your back, and I don't like that kind of behavior.
Are you conflating all cultures in the world here?
No.
Just Western culture, European culture, American, what?
I think it always depends on the person, and I keep repeating myself. it's only in my experience that whatever these YouTube channels like Men Going Their Own Way are pointing out, I'm saying I agree with some of the things they're saying. They're not all wrong, because I don't like this anti-male movement that's going on. I think if women want to be successful, well, let them form alliances with each other if they're being stopped. But I don't think anybody's technically stopping anyone. I think they're blaming somebody else for their failures.
Can I investigate with you guys how the Me Too movement started? You know, I mean, women's lib has been around, you know, as you mentioned, Carol,
Since the 60s.
Since the 60s, and there were, you know, hero women who wrote books and made speeches, and it did catch fire. I mean, it was a big strain in American awareness. I'm not sure how much effect it had, but I think it had some effect over the years. You know,
I would say
people insisted on it, and it still exists. You know, it existed until. And I would say it existed until the birth of the Me Too movement, which I'll throw out a thought to you. The Me Too movement was born on January 20th, 2017. It had a lot to do with Donald Trump and his inauguration and the Women's March that took place at that time. And it was a reawakening. It was a repackaging somehow of women's lib in general. It was another, you know, story. It was before Harvey Weinstein too, before him, way before him. And I think it was, you know, it caught on because Trump is a misogynist. You know, he doesn't like women much, actually. And remember the bus, don't forget the bus. And so I think women were getting together on this, and it was a movement waiting for an iconic event, and presto, Harvey. Okay, now it pops right out. Okay, and then it expands from that. I mean, I would like your view of this in terms of the dynamic of what happened. So Harvey comes, and that was plain and simple sexual harassment in the old-fashioned classical sense, you know, that we have all heard about, but maybe we don't know too much about it. We don't know people necessarily who would tell us that they were involved in such incidents. And now it's emancipation of the information about those incidents, okay? And it started out with Harvey, and it went from Harvey to a whole re-examination, if you will, of the relationship in culture between men and women in this country, and as it works out, around the world. You know, I went to Australia. This issue exists in Australia. It must exist everywhere now.
It does exist.
Harvey has had a profound effect on the issue around the world. Well, and that is interesting.
The thing is, it didn't just start with Harvey. Of course, it's been around forever, but you'll recall Bill Cosby, Roger Ailes. There have been a number of people in the media that have been affected. It's just that no one at his level, at Harvey Weinstein's level, with his power, his notoriety, his wealth, finally getting caught. And so that's what I think caught the attention.
I'm trying to remember whether Ailes and
that was before.
Bill
Cosby,
O'Reilly,
that was before
Fox
Weinstein.
News, whatever. That was before.
Yeah.
So this is all waiting to happen. It was catalytic what happened with Harvey Weinstein.
Just to play a little bit of a devil's advocate, I understand what Harvey Weinstein did was wrong, obviously. That's very clear. However, I'm curious about the women going into the hotel room for a business meeting. I find that very peculiar, unless the woman is particularly naive. I would never have a business meeting in a man's hotel room.
Well, these were young women in their 20s.
Sure, there's always an excuse. See, there's always an excuse. And in the ancient world, in ancient Rome, in ancient Japan, acting, the profession of acting has always been associated with prostitution. I mean, this is not something new. The upper classes in ancient Rome, the patricians, were horrified when Nero or some other emperor, they wanted to act on stage, because that was something only lower class peasants did. And the acting, if you say you're an artist, even in some cultures in the upper circles today, if you say you're an artist or an actor or an actress, that means you're a person with loose morals.
Well,
so it's always been
that's
the case.
The case in America?
I'm just saying there's no, because everybody wants to be famous here, and that's very shallow.
Well,
so
I disagree with that too, but I can't generalize and say that just because you're a young actor or actress and you choose to have a meeting with somebody who is powerful, who has a great possible influence over your career, in and of itself means that you are opening yourselves up to sexual
But you're correct in that they're young, and I would add to that naive, because if you look at people who are fascinated by the areas of acting, because it's escapism, it's not being yourself, you're being somebody else. And people who are fascinated by psychology or the study of psychology, they tend to be very insecure and damaged people.
Okay, I don't agree with the generalization.
I'd like to clarify one thing.
Most people are aware of that.
You're creating this kind of uniform scenario.
Right.
And in fact, every scenario is different. Every one of these sexual harassment guys is different. Their MOs are different. And the women who were snared in the sexual harassment, they were different. They were there for different reasons. Some of them, were completely victims. And they were snared, against their will, absolutely against their will. And whether it was rape or just harassment, without rape, they were brought into it against their better judgment, against their will, and they could have avoided it, but they didn't avoid it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
And
then you get the other. Then you get the
there.
other kind.
Yeah.
Okay, the other kind who may have suspected there was something in that hotel room.
Who may have actually wanted to seduce him.
Yes.
There's absolutely women.
There's
out
a
there.
range.
So it's a range.
And there are men who want to seduce women.
It's a wide range of possibilities of scenarios,
And
we should not characterize them as a single uniform, experience.
It's just an observation I've made about people who are fascinated by acting and wanting to be famous and interested in psychology. There's a little pattern,
to your title about women and the phalanx. And I wanted to ask you, in Greece, were those all men who were in the Greek army?
Of course.
Okay.
The women had some power, but in the army, I mean, physically, men are stronger. Yeah,
yes, exactly. So therefore, the measure of how the phalanx should work is based on white, right, because they are Greek men, right? So their measure of success is based on how that phalanx works. And yet women could have come to a different way of measuring success or winning the war that didn't include this phalanx. It could have been some other.
The phalanx I was using.
You don't have to have a phalanx.
The phalanx I was using
point.
as a metaphor for how women and men behave differently in a corporate and pressure-filled environment. And the thing I'm angered about, what's happening, is this anti-male movement, which if men are too busy moving civilization forward, they're not busy trying to stop.
What is the anti-male movement? What is that?
Well, it seems. My perception is that this Me Too is part of this hatred of men, or while things go wrong,
you don't think it's just a further expression of women's lib? You think it's more than that?
I think that it's a little bit more than that. And there are various YouTube channels by men who are expressing this. That's all I'm bringing to light, because you don't hear the other side sometimes. So I'm not saying I agree with everything. It's just an observation I'm making.
And
it seems to be divisive. It seems to be separating men and women.
There is a little bit of a divisiveness, and I'm protective of Jay as a white male to make sure that he doesn't get harmed in all this. And what I see, though...
And I am Carol.
And the reality, what I see is that, as in every major seismic change, sometimes we overreact. On one, if the center is the right place to be, and we've always been too far to one direction, which is too much sexism, too much racial biases and discrimination. Right now, maybe we're in a position where we have overcompensated, and now where we should be, we're men and women, black, white, red race, old and young, disabled and fully capable of functioning, be equally treated or fairly treated. We're not there right now because we're compensating too much on the other side. And in this case, that means that the white male, who has been mostly the perpetrators in these sexual harassment cases that have come up, have been negatively affected.
I'm sure other kind of men perpetrate.
And I think we'll come back to the center. I think that's my point.
That's a very interesting approach.
I would like it to come back to the center.
You have a social disruption here.
Exactly.
And this disruption, as any good and valid social disruption, it goes too far sometimes. It doesn't go far enough other times.
Right.
It's self-disruptive, isn't it? Right. So my question, and really I think you need to cover this as the host of this discussion, Pauline, is what has happened since Harvey? In fact, what has happened since January 20th?
I don't see much change,
What
actually.
is the dynamic? Well, no, I think
I see a
there's
lot of
gotta be
drama,
a lot of
but I don't
change
see,
going
yeah.
on.
Okay.
There's different
What?
scenarios are popping up.
What?
You know, women who, you know, were not at all in the kind of spider web that Harvey Weinstein has created, you know, in his studio and all that. Women who have not been nearly as much harassed, if you will, have come forward. When we say Me Too, we're finding people who've now recently come forward who we would not have considered in the Harvey Weinstein scenario.
Let's talk
Okay.
about the Dr. Nasser,
Yes,
Larry
the gymnast,
Nasser,
yes.
the gymnast who abused women and now we know men, young men athletes. Okay, so where years ago, and obviously they kept silent all these years, thinking perhaps it was their fault, it was too shameful. Here was this person, this doctor who was well known and admired. How could he be doing something wrong? So finally, a movement like Me Too gives them the sense of, my voice is worth hearing. I have confidence in what I actually feel. And it gives them that strength to go forward. Is that bad? No,
Sure.
that's good.
The doctor is a good
good.
example, but we also have to be aware of women who are doing this for attention seeking and doing false claims. You have to always
There may
be on
be,
the other
but
side
It's
of
in
the
that's
the
true with
rainbow. It's
everything.
in
They're
the
not all telling the
spectrum.
truth.
But it's
so,
true
yeah.
with
So we have
everything.
lots of different scenarios going on. So, I mean, I would suggest to you guys that there's a dynamic happening. The dynamic started arguably in, you know, the expansion of this whole notion on January 20th, largely because of Trump. Trump is still in office and still doing things. He's never been brought to the carpet on this issue, right? Never. And I think a lot of women are sort of playing him out as a proxy. This is a proxy for going after Trump. This is their way of expressing the issue that he is not resolving. And there are other proxies, other situations like this that are similar, including white supremacy and all those things that he has created. So there's a dynamic. And what I'm really asking is, where is this dynamic going? Is it going to be spent soon? Because the press moves on. And distraction distracts distraction. So at the end of the day, are we going to be having this conversation in 60 days or 90 days? Or will something else come up that marginalizes it? Will it go under the waves? And I really don't have the sense that this is a permanent kind of fixture. I have the sense that this is something that will last a certain ephemeral length of time, and then we'll have some other distraction.
But I would like to think that it has seeped down to a next level, which is you find now businesses, corporations, small employers are doing education, self-reflection. What have we been doing that has caused this situation? What can we change? How can we educate not just the women, but the women and the men and their customers and the relationships and their policies and their and everything. So I think that is good, and that change, even though it might be very slow and there might be times where it goes backwards, it's moving forward.
Yeah, but perhaps it's the approach, because I, by and large, deal mostly with professional men. And the people who have caused most problems to me are other women. So there's that scenario as well. And
that's
that's my
your
experience. That's been
and
my
not
experience.
mine.
And your experience is different. So
Yeah.
do you want to tell people
Sure.
a little bit about that?
You know, as I said, I came of age in the 60s and 70s. I went to law school in the 70s when there were 15% women in my class. When I moved to Hawaii, I was the first president of an organization called Hawaii Women Lawyers. And that organization still is in existence. Our goal is actually someday to be not necessary, because we don't have Hawaii men lawyers.
No.
We have Hawaii women lawyers because there's been a need to have an organization that represents women, to promote women as judges, as partners, as department, cabinet heads. And we've done all that. We go and testify, and we bring applications forward, and we promote opportunities for women to develop
You're
leadership.
talking about a motion, a movement rather, that has existed for 50 years or 60, and it has certain traction.
Yeah.
And you've been actually, in this state, you've been
Involved,
an important
very-
person in all of that.
well,
but that's not what happened on January 20th, and it's not what happened with Harvey Weinstein and his progeny. What's happened is that raw sex got involved here. Raw sex. It isn't, I mean, you can say power and sex is all the same, but it's not. The reality is, just like in Spotlight and the Catholic Church, you know, and those young boys and the priests and all that stuff, which is still
It's still going on,
It's
yeah.
still, you know, it's terrible, still going on,
All over
and
the
it's still
world.
being discovered. And I suppose the change, if we're looking for sea changes, is that people are less reluctant to come forward. Okay, and that's something. But bottom line is, I think there's a distinction between the women's liberation movement, equality of women, you know, fair pay, and whatever it is in corporate life. You're talking about corporate life and the phalanx issue and all
Yeah.
that. The reality is, this is about sex. This is about inappropriate sexual conduct. And that is, it's almost like another discussion.
Yes, it is, yeah. So that's the Me Too part. So the other discussion, because we want to talk about female entrepreneurship, is that one of the things I wanted to combine these concepts is because I get annoyed when it's almost as if, and Bill Burr, the comedian, talks about this a lot, it's almost as if women, they kind of are insulting or say something, or they're not responsible for their actions. They kind of regress into being a little girl. So what I noticed is that, you know, they asked Elon Musk, they said, where did you learn how to design a rocket? He said, well, I went to the library and I read a book about rockets and I designed a rocket. So it's not as if there's a boogeyman that's stopping women from doing what they want. Women have been left alone for decades now, but I don't see a lot of them going to the library and learning how to design a rocket. It doesn't seem to be the hard wiring in most females. I would say in a small percentage of females, yes, that exists, and you shouldn't stop those people.
But is that your definition of success?
But no, I'm just giving an example. Okay. I'm just giving an example of Elon Musk. Somehow, because in my observation, and you might disagree, but a lot of people have come to the conclusion the best chefs are male. It seems like the men have a creative force that the women lack. My subject is Freemasonry. Women are Freemasons as well in certain jurisdictions, but they didn't invent their own ritual. They just copy the male one. So this has been my observation that, number one, nobody's stopping technically people from doing anything. If you really want to do something, you will make it happen. And the other thing is, there is a lack of a creativity. There's some appear to be some things that the male has naturally, and the female has other characteristics that might be useful, but it's not the same as the males. That's all I'm saying.
But are you basing a value judgment on which is better?
No, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying to force women that we need more women in oil and gas. Well, I don't think they're interested in heading up oil and gas companies.
There may be a few, though.
Okay, that's fine, but there are a few. It's not the vast majority of the female population that
wants to. What's that got to do with the Me Too movement?
Oh, we've shifted the subject. I'm going into the entrepreneurship side, as I mentioned before I did it. So.
Well, but that's not the show here today, is it, Pauline?
Oh, well, it's the combination of it because
okay. I just want to make
because
that
of the
point.
theme, because of the theme of the show.
Because to me, that is an underlying process, an underlying movement that's been happening, and there are fits and starts, and there's progress, and maybe not so much. But what we really have, the news of the moment, if you will, the one that pops up on the front page, is not about that.
Yeah.
It's about inappropriate sexual conduct, and I think the discussion there is more about the difference between men and women, about our culture, how we are brought up in our culture, how we are taught to think about sex, both sides, and how we express ourselves in the frustration of not being able to realize, you know, the biological implications, impulses of our sexual gender.
And I think it's also the presentation of it, because if you have women wearing pussy hats and dressing up like vaginas, I think men just laugh at that and think they're silly. And sometimes there's a contradiction in the behavior where if Ali Reisman, she was abused by this doctor, and then she poses nude, it confuses men when women do things like that, because men think a particular way.
It's a mixed signal, isn't it?
It's a mixed signal, and men get really confused by those mixed signals, and that's all I'm saying. And unfortunately, we don't have more time to go into this, but maybe we can pick it up on next year's International Women's Day.
Hold that thought.
Thank you, white male and Asian female, for being my guests. So we're politically correct somewhat on this show. And this is my last show for this year on We Like the 1%, and I'll see you next year for more of We Like the 1% every Thursday at 11 a.m. Until then, safe travels and aloha.